Yeah. Check it out, y'all. Check it out, y'all. To the beat, y'all. To the beat, y'all. Never sleep, y'all. Never sleep, y'all. Never stop, y'all. Never stop, y'all. Never quit, y'all.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and we've been covering the major environmental catastrophe in East Palestine, the toxic release, the burning of toxic chemicals by Norfolk Southern Company. And we recently learned that, in fact, there's a connection to the oversight of this accident by the EPA and by a company called Tetra Tech. And joining us today on Workweek is Greg Schwartz, as an award-winning reporter, and he was featured by the Society of Environmental Journalists as an SEJ Spotlight Reporter of the Week in April 2021. He has also done extensive coverage of Tetra Tech and the relationship of Tetra Tech to what has been going on at Hunters Point and Treasure Island in San Francisco. And first of all, welcome to the show. And Greg, why don't you talk about your original work in Ohio and what you found out about the EPA and its oversight of environmental problems in Ohio?
Okay, Steve, I guess that goes back to my time. As I know in today's story that's out at Counterpunch, I was in the graduate journalism program at Kent State University, and I was looking for something to investigate. And so I sent an email to Bob Petrakis from the Columbus Free Press, who was a reporter whose work I admired. And I asked him if he might have any tips on something I might investigate in Northeast Ohio. And he put me in touch with an activist named Chris Borello from Concerned Citizens of Lake Township, which is near Canton, Ohio. And reporters were already calling her the Erin Brockovich of Ohio when I met her in 2005 for her devoted activism to investigating what was really there at the Industrial Excess Landfill Superfund site in Uniontown, Ohio, which is just north of Canton. And so I worked with her for more than a year on that story, actually, and learned a lot from her about digging into crooked science and regulatory capture in the EPA Superfund program and at Ohio EPA. And I eventually got that story published as a cover story with the Cleveland Free Times called Buried Secrets. And well, we stayed in touch, we only met once in person, but we stayed in touch over the years. And every now and then she would call me up and she'd say, we'd catch up. And then she'd say, Greg, I know you're going to come back to this story someday, the IEL. And I'd always say, I don't know, Chris, I feel like we took it as far as we could. I don't know where else I would go with that story. And that went on actually for more than a decade until one day in 2018, when she dug up a 20-year-old press release from the Project on Government Oversight in DC that was questioning why the EPA was rehiring a contractor at the Industrial Excess Landfill named as PRC/TetraTech, when that contractor had already been found to have made numerous mistakes in radiation sampling testing procedures there with the groundwater at the IEL. And, she sent that to me and I'm reading it, and the list of mistakes, it just, a light bulb went on in my head, because the stuff they were describing was similar to what whistleblowers had reported about Tetra Tech EC at Hunters Point. And one of those items was even exactly the same as I note in today's story, the mistakes on chain of custody forms that would bring into question the validity of those forms. And so I thought to myself, wow, we didn't know there was any, I didn't know who Tetra Tech was back in 2006, much less that they had any involvement or that there was anything to suspect about them. Being back in the Bay Area since 2016, that story was big in the news, so I was familiar with it. And I think maybe it took someone with an Ohio, San Francisco connection like myself to connect these dots. And so I thought I'll dive back into that story and see just how involved were they at the IL. And so turns out, so when they were being called PRC/TetraTech, that was because they had acquired a contractor named PRC, Planning Research Corporation, Environmental Management, which Tetra Tech apparently purchased in 1995, technically after the water sampling controversies from 1992-93 that Pogo was calling out in that press release in 98. But by the end of 98, PRC had been renamed Tetra Tech EM, and Tetra Tech EM also did participate in a controversial groundwater sampling at the IEL in the fall of 1998. And then they were controversially tasked by EPA with putting together the community involvement plan at the IEL in 2001, which Pogo again objected to. So, you know, Tetra Tech Incorporated likes to claim that they had nothing to do with what went on there at the IEL, but that's not really true. Their subsidiary, Tetra Tech EM, was involved both before and after they bought them. And so it's kind of an inconvenient truth, I think. They don't like me to point this out, but, you know, because they say the fraud by Tetra Tech EC at Hunters Point was merely due to a couple of rogue employees acting on their own. That's their story. They're sticking to it. The Department of Justice, as you know, of course, has joined those whistleblower false claims lawsuits against Tetra Tech EC. But Tetra Tech Incorporated claims that the guys were fired. I can't hear you. And I can't hear you anymore, Steve.
Are you saying that Tetra Tech is now being sued by the Department of Justice along with whistleblowers because of fraud and retaliation against whistleblowers at Treasure Island and Hunters Point?
No, you're familiar with how the Department of Justice joined those whistleblower lawsuits in 2018 that David Anton is representing the whistleblowers against Tetra Tech EC and their false claims lawsuits. And the Department of Justice joined those in 2018. The judge asked them to be consolidated into one suit in 2020. So that's why Tetra Tech will object if you say that the Justice Department joined multiple lawsuits. It's technically now been consolidated into one. But yes, that is still ongoing litigation.
So we have a situation where two executives, managers of Tetra Tech went to prison in federal prison because of falsifying the test results in Hunters Point, Treasure Island, which is a radioactive nuclear dump site. And there was never a congressional investigation as the largest environmental fraud.
Well, Nancy
by the
Pelosi
US
actually
government.
called for an IG investigation into the EPA and the Navy's oversight there. And I think we're still waiting. We should FOIA them because maybe those reports are ready. And sometimes when they do a report where they don't come to a conclusion that they think the public might like, they keep it quiet. Because another story I recently did was about the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant in San Luis Obispo, where the former resident senior safety inspector alleged that the NRC and PG&E had colluded to sweep threatening seismic data under the rug, indicating the plant should be shut down because it's vulnerable to an earthquake stronger than it's built to withstand. So Michael Peck, that inspector, he told me more recently for the story I did last year that he had tried, there was an investigation by the NRC office of the IG at Senator Barbara Boxer's behest, and that Peck was interviewed for this multiple times, but then he was trying to FOIA them once a year to get the report and couldn't get it. He thought they were stonewalling him. I found that they actually hadn't completed it yet the last time he asked. So I filed a new FOIA request and got the report, which I don't think was ever really released. But I liberated it with my FOIA request and found that while they did conclude there was no regulatory collusion, the report was filled with holes and red herrings and even outright lies. And so I think, yeah, we need to find out what happened with those IG investigations into the Navy, the botched Navy cleanup there at Hunters Point.
And this company, Tetra Tech, now has been hired to do air samples. I see a survey that they did, and apparently the air is safe, completely safe in East Palestine. Are you comfortable that they can be trusted to protect the people of East Palestine in that community?
No, not really. And it's not just Tetra Tech. Of course, the EPA says they have 16 contractors working out there now. But yeah, that was a red flag to me when I saw that Tetra Tech Incorporated was preparing the air monitoring reports there. And maybe they are using the best available science. I'm sure we all hope that they are. But I think the EPA, if they want citizens to trust the science, as Michael Reagan said, I think they should be releasing all of the field work plans that all of their contractors are using for air monitoring, for water sampling, for soil testing. Let's be 100% transparent so that other independent scientific experts can see what they're doing. Because as Steve Donziger noted, he called for President Biden to put together an independent task force to look at this whole issue in East Palestine, because as he wrote, corporations and big polluters like Norfolk Southern, they don't fear government's ability to regulate them because of the regulatory capture at the EPA.
And in the Bay Area, Kamala Harris was aware of this. She was district attorney in San Francisco.
Aware of what?
She was attorney general when this malfeasance was going on by
Well,
Tetra
now I
Tech.
think you have to be careful and clarify exactly what you're accusing her of being aware of, because some people might misconstrue that the wrong way. And so, how do you mean?
Well, when workers were being fired at Tetra Tech for being whistleblowers, she was a district attorney in San Francisco. And she set up an environmental unit, supposedly environmental justice unit, that was never investigation or prosecution. When she was attorney general in California, she was aware of the issue of the corruption, or the fact that Tetra Tech had been accused of retaliating against whistleblowers who were saying that they had fraudulently done the tests. There was never prosecution by the California Attorney General of Tetra Tech, and the departments of Gavin Newsom, Brown before him, and Gavin Newsom have never prosecuted Tetra Tech. In fact, Gavin Newsom gave a $200 million contract, no bid contract, to Tetra Tech to be involved in the camp cleanup.
That was disgusting. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I like to think that if a company like that is being sued by the Department of Justice, there should be a moratorium on them getting more government contractors. Although another friend of mine who works in sort of a city government back east, he was saying, well, but what about due process, And so, yeah, that's an issue too, except then these big deep pockets contractors will drag these legal issues out for years and years and years. Meanwhile, they're still raking in all these contracts. And I think we have to be careful what we say that Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris did or didn't know. Although what we do know is that, yeah, a lot's gone on, and that yet Tetra Tech is still getting all these contracts, and EPA is giving them a ton of contracts. And I think that's another issue, is the EPA has become severely understaffed and corrupted, especially worse than ever during the Trump era, when the Trump regime's war on science led many longtime EPA staff to jump ship and abandon the agency. And so that's something that we're still dealing with the fallout of. And that's part of the reason so many contractors like Tetra Tech and all these other ones are getting all this money from the EPA, because they're so understaffed. I think Congress really needs to look at that and say, well, why aren't we funding the EPA? We should fund the EPA so they can hire their own scientists and not have to outsource everything to Tetra Tech and these other contractors.
Well, Michael Reagan also is dealing with a complaint that was made about an Apple whistleblower, Ashley Govic, who worked at Apple. They had built they had a office on top of a Superfund site in Silicon Valley, and she complained about it. She raised issues about it, and she was retaliated against by EPA, and the EPA tried to stop her from filing complaints. So, I mean,
did you say Apple whistleblower?
Yeah, Apple.
Yeah, the Biden administration likes to talk a lot about environmental justice, but talking and delivering are two different things. So I think we're still seeing a bit of a disconnect there.
And Ohio seems to have a plethora of toxic catastrophes, radioactive material, all kinds of toxins. Would you be comfortable living in Ohio and living near one of these sites with the lack of oversight and the fact that the EPA apparently is saying that they want Tetra Tech involved in the oversight of what happened in East Palestine?
Well, I really wouldn't be comfortable living near any Superfund site anywhere in the country. They're the most polluted sites in the country. And as we've seen, there's so much crooked science and regulatory capture trying to keep these sites in compliance. I mean, maybe not every single one of them, but we've seen enough to be concerned. And so would I want to live near the industrial excess landfill in Uniontown, Ohio? Hell no. And so it's a problem with these sites. And certainly it's a lot of reason to be concerned in East Palestine right now. You know, what carcinogens and chemicals were created during that burn that we don't even know about yet, right? And so we need really much more transparency from the EPA on what they're doing, how they're doing it. And as Dr. Mike Ketterer noted, who I interviewed for the news story today, who used to work in the Office of Enforcement at EPA, you know, he talked about how when he was there, the corruption was always in, you know, what did you not look for? And how low detection levels did you go for, right? And so, you know, if you don't want to find something, you know, you won't. And so what level of investigative rigor is being applied there, I think is a very relevant question for the EPA and every single one of their contractors, as well as Norfolk Southern, who, so now the whole site is about to become a Superfund site. I've already seen a letter, I think, that was sent from Uncle Sam to Norfolk Southern, suggesting they're going to be on the hook as the polluter in this case. And so Palestine is probably about to become a Superfund site of its own. And we're really going to want to keep an eye on that, especially with the soil issue and the water. And, you know, the air probably is better by now, but I think the water and the soil are still areas of much concern.
You found a connection between Norfolk Southern and Tetra Tech. Why don't you talk about that?
Oh boy, yeah, thanks to Twitter. I mean, so a lot of people these days are talking about abandoning Twitter because Elon Musk is trying to ruin it by opening the floodgates for right-wing disinformation and misinformation. And that is unfortunate that he's doing that. However, Twitter is still extremely important, especially to journalists. I find Twitter to be an invaluable tool, both for research and networking and amplifying stories. And so, you know, I was searching for news and commentary on this story, and I found someone commenting that saying that Norfolk Southern and Tetra Tech both have the same top 2 shareholders, which I looked into, turns out to be true. Vanguard Group and BlackRock, right? Both are the top 2 shareholders of both Norfolk Southern and of Tetra Tech Incorporated. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because, you know, as I wrote here in the story, I think this encourages a company like Norfolk Southern to take more risks with safety, because if they're taking a financial hit on an accident like this, their biggest investors are basically making it back on Tetra Tech, banking on being involved in the testing and the cleanup. I think we're not sure if they're going to be involved in the cleanup yet, but I think we definitely want to keep an eye out to see who is going to be involved there.
Would you say that's an incestuous relationship?
I would. And so is it illegal? I think probably not yet, but should Congress be looking at how these kind of overlaps encourage disregard for safety like this? I think that's an area of reasonable concern that congressional investigators should be looking into, and maybe there should be some kind of law that, I don't know, of course, one way to get around this is to get the contractors out of the EPA. So let's staff up the EPA to hire their own scientists so they don't have to farm out so much work to contractors, I think is one of the lessons that we need to learn here.
And who is calling it? Is there any Democratic Congress people who are calling for that?
Not that I know of yet. Of course, who knows how many people even know about it. I'd like to talk to Sherrod Brown's office about what they know about this, but of course, Chris Borello from Concerned Citizens of Lake Township, she's been in touch with them many times over the years. And there was one time back in, I don't know, 2008, 9, 10, she was trying to get some answers out of the EPA about something they were doing at the landfill. And she tried to go through Brown's office, and Brown's office basically told her they couldn't get an answer from the EPA either. And so something is wrong there. When I was reporting that story in 2006, the first one for the Cleveland Free Times, Buried Secrets, one of the people I talked to told me that regional EPA headquarters are like fiefdoms of their own, often operating independently from the US headquarters in DC. So I think we need more light on what's going on at EPA Region 5, headquartered in Chicago. Now they're calling themselves EPA Great Lakes, as if they needed some rebranding for some reason, which I find odd. And so they have their own hierarchy. And I think, I've discussed this with Borello over the years on numerous occasions. I think that the cover up at the industrial excess landfill has been deemed too big to fail due to the massive liability if it was proven that Department of Energy radioactive Cold War weapons waste was in fact dumped there. And there's been cancer cases where the case got sealed, and so there was testimony reportedly about documents indicating DOE weapons waste getting dumped there, but those cases got sealed when the companies settled, and so we haven't been able to access those documents. And then, of course, the EPA ombudsman, Bob Martin, was trying to dig into all that, and the Bush regime EPA in 2002 shut him down, took over the ombudsman's office. He quit, got railroaded out of there, basically. And so we need a lot more transparency at the EPA because it's getting bad.
If the Democratic Party, Biden, Kamala Harris, Newsom, they're involved in these getting money from these companies, how do you expect to be having an end to regulatory capture by these companies?
Well, as we see here, as something I've learned reporting on this story over the past 18 years now, I've been looking at this with a kind of a break in the middle, but regulatory capture at the EPA is a long time bipartisan problem. And, conservatives who rant about government regulation and the EPA, they don't realize how captured the EPA already is, even under Democratic administrations. Although that said, it went to an all-time low under the Trump regime with their whole war on science and trying to just put up every aspect of government regulation for sale to the highest bidders. And so I just fail to understand how anyone in Ohio and East Palestine, which apparently voted heavily for Donald Trump, how they can not connect the dots to see how his foul regime deregulating safety is what really paved the way for this crash. Although, of course, as I write in the story, President Biden's hands are not clean after forcing the railroad union to take a bad deal that they didn't want, basically busting the strike that they were threatening. So it's a bipartisan problem.
Well, that was almost unanimous. All these Democrats, supposed pro-labor Democrats, voting to oppose a contract on 120,000 railroad workers without a day's off for sick pay.
It's absurd, right? And how a company like Norfolk Southern gets away with downsizing the staff so much to jeopardize safety, but yet the CEO is making plenty of money. They're making lots of money, but they keep downsizing the staff, and now we see that there's these safety issues, and it's just outrageous. And it's the whole corporate capture of not just the EPA but our entire system. And so like stuff like Citizens United is another clear culprit, turning corporate money into people so they can just infest our system with even more corrupt lobbying. And we see that as a real problem here. And so, we're seeing Republicans try to throw shade at the Biden administration for this incident, yet they were presiding over this deregulation. So there's just an incredible amount of hypocrisy going on both sides.
And the Tetra Tech tried to threaten you and tried to shut you down. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, as you know, they sent a letter threatening to sue the San Francisco Bayview for defamation back in 2020 if they didn't retract my series. And the octogenarian publisher, Mary Ratcliffe, God bless her, she said, I remember she said something like, I always say you can measure the strength of your reporting by the virulence of the opposition, and Tetra Tech threatening to sue is pretty virulent. She stood firm. She insisted they were bluffing. There was no way they were going to sue this little community newspaper. And I consulted with Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, as well as with an attorney in Ohio who was familiar with this case. And he advised me just to stand firm on the facts reported, not try to like debate with them in an editorial or something. And so that's what we did. We stood pat, and they backed down. Mary Ratcliffe was right. And so then this past December, I had another story about Hunters Point published in Earth Island Journal. It was called The Elusive Quest for Environmental Justice at Hunters Point. And it was mostly about how the EPA recently let it be known that they're not going to hold the Navy responsible for full cleanup to unrestricted residential use, as the city of San Francisco voted for back in the year 2000. But I threw in a paragraph in this story about how, they say the fraud was due to the rogue employees, but they had another subsidiary involved in some similar controversy at the industrial excess landfill years earlier. They didn't like that. They sent a letter threatening again. They wanted it retracted. They wanted the whole story retracted, or they wanted a handful of demands. And so we did concede a few very minor revisions on that. It's a complex story. They were nitpicking over a few things. And so we conceded a few revisions, but we did not back down on the major points of contention. One of them being that they wanted to delete that sentence about having another subsidiary involved in similar controversy in Ohio. We kept that because it's true. And they also objected to throwing shade at them about the rogue employees, because they claim that the NRC exonerated them. And that was news to me, but I talked to David Anton, who's representing the whistleblowers, and he sent me the NRC investigation, which technically did say they think, it was these guys and the management wasn't involved. But as David Anton notes, there were a number of holes in that report, including some, and he gave me some information about how there was too many complaints about the stuff that went on to possibly be all the work of two people. So something doesn't add up there, but they can technically claim the NRC gave them a pass on that. But I think, as we see with the NRC at Diablo Canyon, boy, it's hard to trust the NRC either these days as a handmaiden for the nuclear industry that they are. And so again, you just have this incestuous relationship between a big government contractor like Tetra Tech and the agencies that are supposed to be regulating them, except they use them too much. There's just too much overlap there. And so, again, maybe Tetra Tech has changed their ways and has turned over a new leaf, and it's just doing nothing but the best available science anymore. But the fact that they have some history that suggests otherwise is troubling. And we need more transparency. If the EPA is going to use these contractors, they need to give us they need to publish the work plans so that independent experts can, take a look and see for themselves.
So you've been at this story a long time, this connection you've made between Ohio, the failure of EPA, corporate takeover of EPA by corporations, and in San Francisco Bay Area with Hunters Point, Treasure Island, and the fact that there's never been a congressional investigation of this $1 billion fraud at Hunters Point, Treasure Island to clean up this nuclear dump site. Pelosi, Feinstein, Kamala Harris never called for a congressional investigation. Where did the $1 billion go?
Again, Pelosi called for an IG investigation, which is, But then
She
who
could have
watches?
called for a
Who watches the
congressional.
watchers?
She could have
Right.
called for a congressional
I
investigation.
think she should, because the problem with the IG investigations, as was explained to me by Jeff Roosh from Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, they're a black box. And there's no transparency at all. And even Pelosi wouldn't be updated on what they're doing. And so we're just waiting and waiting for them to put out a report that they won't necessarily even announce when it's ready. And so, yeah, we need to file those FOIA requests to try to get those reports and see what they say.
Well, the U.S.
they're even done.
The U.S. Senate could call congressional hearings on this. Doesn't have to be the Congress. I mean, they could call congressional hearings. In fact,
Yeah.
now,
So I just saw yesterday the Senate Committee on Environmental Works or something. They are going to have a hearing about this incident in East Palestine. And if anyone's listening, I'm certainly ready to share my research on what's going on there with the EPA in Ohio.
and where can people get more information about your work?
Well, they can find me on Twitter, GMS111, and that's got a link to my portfolio at Muckrack and further contact information, or they can direct message me on Twitter. And so all these stories about Hunters Point and the industrial excess landfill are in my Muckrack portfolio. So they're all out there.
Okay, thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you, Steve.